I think it's more than avoid. I think we can reduce it because flu deaths are unfortunately inevitable every year. They're inevitable even when there isn't a pandemic on, because unfortunately, when people are frail and elderly at the end of their life, unfortunately, flu is something that gets people. So I think there is an acceptance that flu deaths will happen. Getting your flu jab will dramatically reduce that, absolutely. But you've summed up quite nicely. We've had a bit of a knock-on effect from COVID and the lockdown associated with that. And we've seen this coming from a long way away. I've been seeing patients with coughs and colds and viruses that traditionally I would see in the winter, but I was seeing them in late spring, early summer, and we're just seeing this crescendo building up. So the feeling in my bones and from what I'm seeing in practice is we're building up to something quite big. People's immunity is you need to be exposed to those bugs winter on winter, sort of build up some natural immunity in the population, and it just isn't happening this year. So yes, flu jabs is one thing. The other things we could do is perhaps, let's think about some of the things that reduce the spread of COVID. It's the same principle for, reducing flu transmission. Washing your hands is always a good thing. I'm still getting my family to wash their hands religiously. So that will reduce the transfer of other, even non-COVID bugs. Things like, alcohol wipes when you've been touching public surfaces in public, etc. I think all those principles that we did are a good one. I really hope we don't go towards another lockdown. And I think, Michelle, I heard what you said earlier about the lockdown and the unintended consequences. I think that we should always bear in mind the lockdown was to avoid overwhelming the NHS. And I think you're right that we perhaps let it go on a little bit too long. And I think perhaps the timing could have been better, maybe starting it earlier, maybe finishing it earlier. But actually, the principle was not about stopping people getting COVID. It was about overwhelming the hospital so that if you turned up with appendicitis in your hospital, they didn't have to turn you away because they were overwhelmed with COVID. That was always the aim.
And I mean, I have to say, I completely understand that people will have very different opinions to me about lockdown and whether or not we should have entered them. I mean, people are emailing me now saying that they completely disagree with me, and that is absolutely fair enough. I don't personally believe that it's my job to protect the NHS. I personally think that it's the NHS's job to protect me. But we'll have this conversation another day because we could go on and on and on about it. So how can people be protecting their immunity? We hear a lot about vaccines and taking them. But what else can people do to boost natural immunity against things that seem to be lurking out there?
Well, first of all, there's general lifestyle things. So we know that people who don't get enough rest, people who don't get enough exercise, people who don't eat a healthy diet, the sensible stuff, the stuff you'd think was absolutely common sense to sort of being healthy. We know that there's evidence that reduces your chance of A, getting flu, but B, getting seriously unwell if you get flu. So there is that type of thing. So, as we see when people approach particularly the Christmas season, people go out, they have late nights, they might come in. Those type of things can reduce their chance of getting it. And remember, it's not just about you getting it, it's about you getting it and giving it to somebody else as well. They're the real risks.